I think the easiest place to start is Juneteenth is essentially a portmanteau of the two words June and 19th, which is the day in which Union officials came to the state of Texas and declared that all people who were previously enslaved under the Confederacy were now free. So essentially, it's the last moment where a formal declaration of freedom is made to a group of people of African descent who were held in perpetual slavery up to that point. Essentially, it verified and validated and made real the promises of the Emancipation Proclamation issued on January 1st, 1863, over 2 years prior. So by June 19th, the war had already ended. The Union had declared victory, the last surrenders had been made. So what is kind of interesting is that these enslaved people would have had no knowledge if the Union officials had not gone there. And if you read some of the slave narratives about going to Texas, some of them do talk about the master or the mistress leaving the state where they were from, could be Virginia, could be Louisiana, or anywhere, because they wanted to go to Texas to see if they could prolong the system of slavery. And so it is probably likely that if the slave owners of the South were not forced to declare that enslaved people were now free, or African Americans were now free, they might not have done it. It's just one way to understand that freedom as an official policy comes in different moments depending on where a person was at. And since Texas in many respects was on kind of the westernmost portion of Confederate territory, it took a little bit longer to get there. And it seemed like a lot of people knew that at the time as well. So post 1865, June 19th, you see some of the first official celebrations happening in about 1867. And this was largely put in place by a program called the Freedmen's Bureau, in which they largely were a governmental structure that went down to prepare African Americans into freedom. Things about marriage, property, voting. They were essentially going to teach them how to become American citizens. And so the Freedmen's Bureau established this celebration specifically for this group of enslaved people in Texas. So originally it was a local holiday, largely recognized by African Americans within this area, particularly the state of Texas. But over many decades, and you could argue up to the Civil Rights Movement, is when it becomes very much recognized by all people of African descent in the United States, because there was and there had been a common struggle against the power structures of the United States governments. So by the mid-20th century is probably when you see a revival of Juneteenth within the broader African American consciousness. And by that point, the momentum is gained, and by 1980, I believe, it's when Texas declares the Juneteenth celebrations an official state holiday. And then there's more or less a domino effect after that, to this point where now I think there's only 3 states that don't have a formal recognition of Juneteenth on their calendars.
I have to be very careful about that word race relations, because it's not a social relation, whether or not someone who is of a different race speaks to you, acknowledges you, but it reflects the relationship that people have, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and whites have with the various institutions of society. One of them happens to be law enforcement, as well as economic, public health, and education and housing. So when you look at the cumulative impact of not the diversity, but the disparity of experiences with African Americans in particular and police interactions, that is why you see that issue rise to one of the top 3 issues of concern. And it's not just the interactions, but the fact that you observe on video a man being murdered at the hands of a police officer, and you saw another person, in terms of a former police officer, hunt down an African-American man. And we just saw the situation with the man at Wendy's. So all these issues converged, and people saw what was happening. They heard about it in the past, but now you have videotape. They all were on video. Now, again, you cannot argue with what you saw on video. And also, we had a trifecta of oppression happening too. Economic insecurity, COVID, people were isolated. They were, and due to isolation, they were pretty much talking and seeing the same thing. So therefore, you had a lot of discussions happening. And you notice in the polls right now, almost 80% of the respondents say the U.S. is headed in the wrong direction. They're not happy. And we also have one of the highest levels of unemployment. So you have all this discontent percolating in the background in the lives of people. And that is contributing to this sense of anxiety that we have to address the social ills that haven't been addressed adequately in the past.